Thanks for listening to the Let's Talk About It podcast, brought to you by WeDeliverYourVision.com, the go-to place for delivering your vision and getting traction fast. Hey everyone, John here, and I'm really pleased to be sitting down with Nils Vinje. So great to have you here, Nils.
Hey, John. Pleasure to be here with you. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, looking forward to the chat. But before we get into that, I just wanted to get a bit of background to help our listeners understand what you do, your business, how it came about, and how you help leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. John, my job is to empower leaders with the tools to confidently handle any situation. And I primarily do this through a program that I run called the B2B Leaders Academy. So I primarily serve people in leadership roles, so people leadership roles at any level in B2B businesses. And the other piece, which you and I connected on as well, is that I also run a podcast called the B2B Leadership Podcast. And both of these can be found by going the letter B, the number 2 and the letter B. That's how we say B2B, leadershippodcast.com and leadersacademy.com. Both of those can have more information about me. But ultimately, I'm here to try to make the world a better place through empowering leaders with tools to build and develop their leadership skills. That's it, pure and simple.
Love it. That's awesome. I love the drive around making the world a better place. And when you say leaders of any level, that's any level with any size of company as well?
Yeah, typically, the place I find the biggest challenges are in the earlier stage and growth stage companies, those where the companies are still, defining a lot of their culture, going through the scaling mechanics, whether that's from a, A and B and C round from a venture funding perspective, or just going from, 50 people to 200 people to 500 people to 1,000 people. There's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be built. And typically leadership development is not one of those things that comes into play until you're a much, much larger organization. So there's a huge need for this skill set and for internal people inside the company to grow and develop leadership skills. But there's a huge challenge in that, frankly, the companies just usually don't have a lot of time to be able to devote to that because they're busy building the business. So my job is to be a turnkey solution for companies like that who know that their leaders, whether they're first-time managers for a year or two, directors, VPs, need leadership development, but don't have the ability to do it themselves. That's where I come into play.
Awesome. Yeah, especially, and probably like where I see some client struggles as well is where a manager's been put into a leadership position or just promoted up and they need to be a leader more, and they fall back to their manage. They just manage more as opposed to leading as well.
That's right. And that's one of the most common, just pitfalls from a leadership perspective, and that most every company at some point or another has fallen victim to. And I've been there myself, is promoting the person who was the best on the team to now lead the team. And what ends up happening is you lose the best person on your team because you took them out of that role. And then you put them in a role and didn't empower them or equip them with coaching and enablement and tools. And they fail oftentimes. And so you lost the best person on your team, and you had a really sometimes traumatic experience trying to figure out how to be a leader with no guidance and support. And it's just a mess. And it, to be completely honest, doesn't have to be that way. Right? It is not, we don't need to, spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on every single person. We need to invest time and energy and attention. And that's what the B2B Leaders Academy is all about, because I can provide a set of tools to leaders, whether they're, new to leadership or more experienced, and they absolutely 100% can make a big impact in their life and the lives of their teams very, very quickly without a whole lot of heavy lifting.
Right. Yes, exactly. The leadership as an art actually means you do what I've found as well is you actually do less work, just more effectively. So yeah,
that's a very good point.
And yeah, right. And you mentioned pitfalls. So that's why I wanted to talk today around what are the common leadership mistakes or pitfalls and how do you work around it? So let's give this a bit of back and forth around what we've seen with our clients and experience, and help the listeners in terms of moving away from some of those pitfalls and mistakes, and ultimately, as you say, make the world a better place through better leadership.
Right. One leader at a time is all it takes, right?
Yes.
And that leader has a better impact, bigger impact, and positive impact on their team. And then those people have an impact on the people around them and their teams, or even in their personal life, right? This transcends way beyond just the professional world, because think of the amount of time that you've spent with your leader, with your manager, the person you report to, with your company. If those are not good experiences, there's a large part of your life, and personally have lived through this, that is disrupted and really in a difficult place. So, these pitfalls we're going to talk about, hopefully they give some insight into things to sidestep and know that there is help out there for people who are willing to commit to not going through these challenges. And I think it's going to be a fun discussion. I've got a good list. I'm excited to hear your list. Let's kick this off.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to start with my first one, which is an interesting little phrase of how, not who. So this is the typical manager trait where getting into a leadership position where their default is to try and solve it themselves. They think about the how, whereas a leader thinks about the who. And I always love the quote I read a few weeks ago around managers bring systems and processes, leaders bring people. So the interesting thing there is, like, as managers get promoted, they face a new challenge, a problem, project. They immediately think, I've got to prove myself. I've got to show results. I've got to get stuck into the weeds. So they think, how do I do this? And that's great from an expertise point of view. But when you get into that leadership position, you need to think about the who can I speak to, who can I leverage, and who can I chat to? And I find that is a bit of a trick, because you've trained your brain many years to think in the how, and you need to take a step back and think, actually, who?
I think that's the key crux of this one, and is identify with it 100%, that we've been trained all the time we were individual contributors to have the answer, right? And this actually leads perfectly into my first one, which was the trap to avoid is always having the answer. Because it is natural to think that, well, I was promoted to this position, whether it was manager, director, VP, even C-level executive. I was promoted to this position because I was the best person that had the answers. But the reality is quite the opposite. In order to be successful in that position, you actually need to not have the answers. And when you don't have the answers, you need to have skills and tools and things along the lines of being a coach to help other people discover the answers for themselves. That is infinitely more valuable and frankly, a whole lot more fun than just walking into the room and always having the answer. Because the reality is, if you always have the answer, you will always be the bottleneck.
Right. Yes, exactly. And it's a phrase often used with my clients as well. It's not about, so you're building on that, it's not about having the right answer. It's about getting to the right answer.
Yes.
So leveraging your knowledge, but also the who, the people, to get to that right answer.
And your point about bringing other people along, like who can I bring along? That's the absolute 100% right mindset, right? It is that it's not, I'm going to bring along myself and that's it because I have all the answers. It's who am I going to bring along that I can, share some of my expertise and the experiences that I've been through to help them figure out a better way to approach this, a better way to do this, and discover an answer that they're going to be, if they come up with it, will be infinitely more likely to actually follow through than if the leader just gave them the answer. Right. So it has a bunch of applications there, but it starts with the mindset, right? So much of our success is tied back to psychology. And in my view, the mindset is don't have the answer.
Right. Yes. Especially with the male leaders. And I don't mean to be, stereotype, but male leaders like to fix things. Right. And they get into that, I can fix this, I can make this work, I'm going to write this email, I'm going to reply, I'm going to set up this meeting, which may well be the right action, but it's just that step back to think, okay, how do I bring my team along? Yeah. Which actually neatly goes into the second mistake that I want to throw out there, which is around not being clear on expectations. And this ties back to part of the work I do with wedeliveryourvision.com, where setting that initial vision or goals for your team ultimately brings out expectations. But what I find is a lot of my clients will set an expectation, set a vision, set a goal, and then walk away, expect the team to just go and do it, usually for weeks, sometimes months, and then not being clear on those expectations. The team doesn't know really what to do. There's an element of empowering your team, but you need to give them guardrails. You need to give them tips on how to move forward with this without micromanaging them.
Yeah, that is perfect. And I've seen that play out a million times myself. That's a core area I focus on, is how to set expectations properly as a leader. Again, regardless of level. Like if you're setting expectations as a VP, that is different than setting some expectations as a frontline manager, just because the nature of the work is different. However, the core construct of what you're doing to set those expectations is exactly the same. It's the application of that is going to feel a little bit different. Now, that's a perfect complement for my number 2, which is actually accountability. The funny thing is, I usually, I call these two the secret sauce: expectations and accountability. And I honestly believe that if you can master, or let's forget master, if you can get incrementally better at setting expectations and then holding people accountable to those expectations, the vast majority of leadership problems that I see across the board in all my work over the last 10 plus years as a leadership coach, they kind of disappear. Right. Because if you get down to the root cause, there is some expectation that was not clear. There was some level of accountability that didn't happen. And as a result, like you were saying, you get weeks or months down the line only to find out that someone didn't know what was going on that should have been addressed months earlier.
Yeah, exactly that. And the beauty of having those expectations is when the team is stressed or you have busy periods, it actually clarifies the priorities. It makes decision-making much easier.
Yeah.
And I find that with a lot of the projects and the project manager coaching I do and leadership coaching on business initiatives is they set expectations and maybe to that point have a next step further, which is they actually get fairly good at defining those goals. And like you said, the assumptions and how to validate that, but then they get busy and a fire pops up, then this new emergency initiative comes in, this month-end close or report needs to come from management, and suddenly all of it goes out the window. And fires happen, I get that. But when you have clear expectations that are the objectives, it makes that decision-making and prioritizing so much easier.
And it just provides a common language to talk about it. Because if your priority shifts in one way and somebody else's priority shifts in another way, and you both have competing priorities, how are you going to solve that problem? Right. You can't, unless you have a mutually agreed upon shared expectation that you are both holding each other accountable to, having this kind of dialogue much further in advance than getting down the line. So yeah, it's fascinating how much is wrapped up in something as simple as an expectation. Because if you look at the definition of an expectation, it literally is just something you expect somebody to do.
Right. Yeah.
So if it's that simple, why is it such a problem?
I know. And there's a bit of I don't know about you, Nils, I find a bit of a fear with some people, and myself included, because I've gone through this journey, is when you state expectations, and I like to break it down into objectives and then key results. So be specific on what you want to achieve, what will show that you've defined or achieved that objective, is by saying it, you're committing to something, which is good. But if I don't commit to something, then I can't really be judged as failing it because I never committed to it.
That's the secret. That's the secret. We as human beings want to avoid commitment as a result of not wanting to be held accountable. It is like it is a human psychology thing, right? The vast majority, there are pockets, of course, and percentage of the population don't apply to this, but the vast majority of the working world will always try to include some wiggle room, let's say. So that, John, I can get you that stuff by probably end of next week. Well, can you hold somebody accountable to something that vague? Right. The answer is no, right? But why did they want to do that? They wanted to do that to protect themselves because they know there is going to be one of those fires that you just talked about that come up that they don't know what it is today, but they know it's going to come up, and they know they can't, don't want to be held accountable because then that means they might have to make a harder decision about something they don't know about that's going to come.
Exactly that. And a lot of it is like you and I, if someone said, hey, heads up, this isn't going to be quite as we expected, I would appreciate that. You know what I mean? Yeah. To get something that's not what I expect, I'd get annoyed at, but to get something in advance, say, hey, heads up, this isn't going to be what you expect, but here's how we're going to fix it. Here's what we're going to do differently. Yeah. And I was just chatting with a client just the other day around, they're so busy with this new project that their base reporting is just bare minimum. They can't do these standards they usually do. And I said, well, did you let the stakeholders know? And they go, well, we've been too busy. And I said, well, why not just reach out to them and say, hey, we know this isn't our standard of work, but given where we are and where we're heading, it will get back to that point. But just a heads up, for these next couple of months, it's going to be bare minimum. And they said, yeah, okay, good point. I said, yeah, just just have the conversation. Nothing bad comes of that.
Well, reminds me of a great saying that bad news does not get better with age.
Right. Yes.
It is not like a fine wine. It is not like cheese. It is bad, right? Yes. Regardless. So if there is quote unquote bad news, right? And this applies to good news too, like celebrate the wins, but also acknowledge that, hey, things are off track. Because every leader in any position, whether you're managing a multi-million-dollar project, you're managing a department of, with tens of millions in P&L, or you're managing a team of 5 people, right? Every single leader would rather have exactly what you just described, which is just tell me what I don't know before I need to know it. And then I'll be fine. Then I'll know it's coming and I can expect it. But to be surprised is not a good place to be. And I used to tell my teams that all the time when I was a VP inside these software companies. I said, look, if a customer, and I was responsible for all the customers and renewals and that sort of thing, I said, if they're going to churn and leave us and not renew their contract, I get it. That's okay. We will deal with that. However, if they're going to churn and you don't know about it before they churn and I don't know about it before they churn, that's where we have a problem. So I didn't care so much about the output and the end result. I wanted to know in advance because then it gave us an opportunity to do something different, exactly like you just said in that scenario with your client. Yeah.
And just this is a great conversation because this is spurning so many thoughts in my head. And when you talk about accountability and marrying that with the expectations, by saying something out loud to people or publishing it means you're committing yourself to do it, which sounds scary. And that's why people avoid it. But what I've worked with my clients and myself is when I actually start to say, I'm going to commit to this product by this deadline or work with my teams to deliver this output, it puts it out in the universe. You're then sharing that, you're setting that expectation and that accountability. So ironically, it makes you charge faster and farther to it. So you actually end up delivering it.
100%. And this applies to your personal development and growth as well, that the more expectations you set for yourself, clearly, and the more accountability that you instill for yourself, the better off you will be because you will be driven to deliver. I mean, look at any point in your life, and anybody in the audience, think about this. Any point in your life where you have achieved exponentially more than either you thought you could or than you ever had before. I guarantee there was one common thing in any of those points, and it was there was a higher level of accountability. Now, accountability might have been some external pressure saying you have to figure this out by this point in time. Otherwise, bad things are going to happen. Or it could have been from a boss or a coach or a leader or somebody else. But there was more accountability. We are wired to crave accountability, even though we despise it. This is why the most successful people in the world all have coaches, right? Tony Robbins, who's coached the coaches of the world, still has coaches himself for this very reason, right? The Tiger Woodses of the world, the Richard Bransons, the Oprahs, they all work with coaches because they need accountability to drive their performance. And it's about those expectations and accountability. That's why I call it the secret sauce, is those two things together go hand in hand. You can't have expectation without accountability. You can't have accountability without expectations either.
Exactly. And that actually neatly leads on to my number 3, which is around leaders sometimes blaming their teams for not achieving something. And ironically, I often see leaders because they have so high expectations for themselves. Leaders become leaders because they are high performers. So they have these huge expectations on themselves, and they also apply those same standards to everyone around themselves, thinking, I'm performing this high, so why can't you? The problem is, not everyone can get to those high standards without that leadership and coaching. So often I see when they're blaming their team, it's because, back to a couple of other points, they're not setting the expectations or being clear on their vision or goals. And just blame in general is just never a good thing.
100%. And I've had many leaders tell me, I have very high expectations of my team in this exact scenario where some portion of the team's performance has fallen down, just like you said, right? And they said, I have really high expectations of my team. I said, okay, so what do you think each of your team members would say if I went up to them one-on-one and I asked them, what are, whatever the leader's name was, what are that person's expectations for you and for this team? And every single time they get this kind of blank stare and they know immediately that they have high expectation for the team, but it hasn't really been communicated. So then we get to the point where the team hasn't delivered and they might be blaming, oh, my team's just not not excellent, not cut out for what we need to do, or not delivering, or blah, 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 et cetera. But the reality is it comes back to the leader.
Yes.
Right? And those previous points on expectations, accountability, if the team fails, it is not the team's fault.
Right.
Simple
exactly. And I love a quote from Richard Branson on this point as well, where he's saying to be a great leader, you have to be a great listener. Mm-hmm. And to be a listener, you have to be asking the team. You have to be getting, to your point, getting feedback from the team. You have to be engaging with your team.
Yeah.
So when you get to the point of blaming, bottom line is you haven't been listening enough. You haven't been asking the questions or engaging them. And
if you're blaming, it's all about you.
Right.
Which again is the cardinal sin of leadership, is that it's not about you. It's about them. Your job, your single most important job as a leader in any field, in any domain, any discipline, at any level, is to do everything possible to make sure that your team is successfgoing.
Yes.
Period. Full stop. That's it. Right. So if you're ever find yourself in a blaming situation like you just described, I'm going to go right back to the leader. I'm not going to spend much time with the team. I'm going to go right back to the leader and find out where's the missing piece here, and what is the maybe their personal expectation that's not being met. But that's a fantastic quote, and it's 100% true. And we have to listen deeply, and we have to make this not about ourselves, because that is the fastest way into turmoil and just nothing going according to plan. Because guess what? Nobody else is like you.
Right. Yes. That's why you're the leader. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. So my number 3 is what I call not being the CEO of your career.
Okay.
Here's the backstory on this. CEOs of companies, their job is to increase the value of their company for their shareholders, right? It's a pretty standard CEO job description. So now, many, many decades ago, it was totally normal for you to work for one company for your entire career. In that case, your company decided what your career path was.
Yes.
Whether you were on the high potential track, whether you were on the just middle management track, whether you were going to stay in IC forever, it was not really up to you. And that was the way that the vast majority of the professional world lived. Now, fast forward to here in 2021, it couldn't be farther from the truth, right? Now we are in a position where we are all, think of yourselves as a free agent, and your job, just like athletes, is to increase your value. So as the CEO of your career, it is up to you to decide what you focus on, what skills you develop, what opportunities you go after, what projects you take on, and ultimately how you show up in some of the situations like we've been talking about. So the job of a CEO of their career as somebody is to increase the value of themselves, because ultimately you are the only thing you're going to be with your entire career.
Right. Yes.
You're not going to be with your company. You're not going to be with your team. You're not going to be with your team members. You may not even be with certain members of your social groups. You will be with you your entire career. So your job now as a free agent is to increase your value so that you can deliver more value to the organization that you work for, and for both you and the organization to come together and say, look, we may not be together forever. That's okay. But while we're together, let's get the most amount of value from each other, and then we'll both win. And at the point at which that stops, then by all means, fine. Then one side can say, I'm done, and we can move on, and everybody's in a better state. So when I see this come up, of not being the CEO of your career, what it looks like is waiting for somebody else to direct career direction or ownership or responsibility, when all the while it's sitting right in front of you every day.
Yes. Yep. Great point as well, because in this day and age, it's so easy to leverage skills, as we talked to at the beginning with the who, not how. So who can I leverage? Don't think, often working with my clients, it's don't think just within your company.
Yeah.
Because again, the managers promoted their company think, okay, who do I know in my company? At best, if they're going to the who, they're doing the who do I know in my company. Whereas nowadays, it's even if it's just Google, it's getting that external perspective on how to do things differently, rather than just sitting in your company's view of things. Right. It was interesting. I think they call it institutional blindness, where you're given, when you're in a role, you become blinkered and blind to an external outside your company. You just focus, this is how we do things, so this is how we're going to do things.
Right.
And you need that external perspective just to give a different fresh eyes and different approach to things to ultimately save you time and stress.
Yeah. And inevitably, if you have the blinkers on, at some point when you exit that organization, or you are exited from that organization, you open your eyes and you're like, oh my goodness, how did I miss all of this before? Because you were so tunnel vision. So that part of the internal versus the external is really important. And being the CEO of your career means also, building your network, because as you build the value of you, you get to contribute more, not only to your organization, but to your family and to your network. And you have more things to offer in exchange for getting value from other people. Yes. So this, there's a great relationship here, but you have to continuously be investing in yourself and looking to figure out how to bring more value to the table in order to earn a seat like that with somebody outside your organization. Yes.
And often bringing in external advisors and people just for a temporary time works really well, because ultimately that's boosting your career. By bringing in external people on a temporary basis, some people often feel threatened by that. But in reality, if you're picking a good support person or a part-time integrator or a project manager, they're actually helping you and your career within the company.
That's right. 100%. 100%. All right. What's number 4?
Number 4 is thanks, Nils, there. It's running hot and cold. So this is where leaders, I see often, is when we start delivering on their vision and building up their initiative and their project. They're all over it up front. It's very exciting. They're enthusiastic. The whole team's engaged. Everyone's excited about new projects and new initiatives, be it launching a new business, a product, or even launching a credit card, which I helped with one of my clients. But then after maybe a few weeks, months, there's a period of time where things start to tail off a bit. So initially the leader's all very engaged. Then there's a time when they're less engaged, or maybe they start to pick up other projects because their team's actually running well. And then something might go off the rails or maybe not go to expectations. So they come back in and feel they have to step in and really, they're all over the team. They're frustrated. They're not doing what they wanted them to do. And so they're really micromanaging to get it back on track. And then they step away again. So it's that hot and cold relationship. And then ironically, the team, as a matter of course, the team then steps back and goes, well, we're going to deliver what we think, but ultimately we know the boss, manager, leader is going to step in. So I'm not going to do too much, because ultimately they're going to step in and fix it for me.
Yeah. Or they'll rip it apart.
Yeah, exactly. And as a result, they step back and they jump in for them. And that's that hot and cold. And the how to fix that is just maintaining regular communications, back to the listening and the expectation setting, and even as simple as monthly one-on-ones with the key members of your team. It's amazing how many clients I talk to where I say, hey, when was the last one-on-one you had with your team? And they say, well, we started well, but now we're just too busy. So we do them every now and again and not regularly.
And that's the kiss of death right there.
Yep.
Right. As soon as the communication falls off, the priority will fall off, the engagement will fall off, the relationships will fall off, the frustrations will build. And I've seen that hot and cold play out a million times, where it's like, okay, I set the stage and now I'm washing my hands of this. You guys go execute in this. And then a month, 2 months, 3 months down the line, come back in. What do you mean it's not done? How is it not done? You had the last 2 months to do this. How did this happen? Oh my gosh, I got to fix it because my reputation's now on the line and I got to do it. And it's like, wait a second, like the hot and cold just doesn't work. It does not, it will never create an environment where people want to do the work, for the very point you mentioned earlier. If you know somebody else is going to come in and either rip apart what you're doing or come in and get down to the micromanagement level, why bother?
Yes.
You're just going to have to go through it anyways. So you might as well wait till that time and somebody else will do it. Or maybe, you just don't want to put yourself in that vulnerable of a position to have your stuff ripped apart after you've done all this months of work. So it's an incredible demotivator. I've seen that many, many times.
Yeah. And it actually erodes trust as well with your team. A huge component of leadership is trust.
Yes.
And one of my frameworks around creating trust actually has 5 C's, and the 4th C is consistency. So running hot and cold is inconsistent, whereas having that stability and consistency, setting expectations, having a plan, following through on what you'll say you'll do, creates a level of trust with your team, because they know what to expect. They're not walking into a meeting wondering if that leader is going to be hot or cold. They know what to expect.
That is the worst feeling, to not know what's on the other end. And well, could they be like good and supportive, or are they going to go into micromanager? Like there's nothing worse on the receiving end from a team and destroying trust than that situation right there. It gives me a little bit of chills thinking back some of the experiences I've had before where that played out.
Right. Yes. So what's Nils, what's your number 4?
All right. So my number 4 is communicating at the wrong level.
Okay.
And here's what I mean. So I don't mean level in terms of company organization level. What I mean is in terms of level of context. There is what we call the crisis of context that exists all around us every day and is pervasive in the professional world, especially in the B2B world. This crisis of context, what I mean is that most people, and especially those in leadership positions, will assume that other people outside of their either immediate vicinity from a team perspective and are still inside their organization have the same level of context about whatever topic they're dealing with that they do. So what happens is that they end up talking at way too low a level of detail for anyone else to understand. So by not paying attention to the audience's level of context that they have and tuning their communication appropriately, they run the risk of completely missing and their message just being completely, goes way right over the head of anybody that they're talking to. So if you're talking to an executive and you talk to them like you're talking to your team, you're doing it wrong. And they will not have any idea what you're talking about. And they will probably walk away from the conversation and say, honestly, I have no idea what Nils does. It sounds like a lot of stuff, but he's just, it's just not really a strategic communicator. They'll use some generic term like that, right? And that is a horrible place to be labeled, but it happens all the time because leaders are not in the habit of taking their audience's context level into account and then tuning their communication to the appropriate level to meet the audience where they are.
Yes, it's interesting actually, because the amount of times I hear the advice of manage up, which has a place, absolutely, or manage your career upwards. So when they're having meetings or working with their teams, to your point, they're using the context of what messaging would appeal to my boss and the shareholders and the managers as opposed to their teams. When ironically, if they're communicating, to your point, around the context with their teams well, the end product is better, which then shows well to your bosses, your managers anyway.
Right. And the everybody else outside of you and your team know nothing about what you do. And I can prove this in just a second. All right. So audience, think about this for a second. Think about some other department or some other team in your organization and answer this question. What do they do? And the resounding answer when I ask thousands of people this question is, I don't know. Or they do, it's very generic terms like marketing or sales. And the reality is we don't know what other teams do, and other teams and other leaders, more importantly, don't know what we do unless we communicate at the appropriate level, unless we build those relationships. So it puts you in a very precarious situation if someone else is looking at you as a leader, again, at whatever level, and says, I have honestly no idea what Nils and his team do. That is not a good place to be in, right? And it is simply the result of the leader not effectively communicating at the right level to other leaders, but also not effectively marketing their leadership either to be able to share the incredible value that they and their team are providing.
Right. Yep. The self-marketing, and to your point, being CEO of your own career, and then going back to that, one of the first points I made around the who, not how. So the who also involves reaching out to other teams, departments, knowing what they do. So at some point you may have to ask them a question or tap into their resources, or they may need something from your team. Again, it's not about being that leader of, charging a path is important, but not solely. You're an individual, but you need to have the team behind you, which is often a team outside of your core team.
That's right. 100%. Yeah. All right.
Number five. Yeah. No. So the final one for me is not letting go. So as we've said, this is all actually building up quite well, because as we said, a leadership position is very different from a management position. So as a manager, you are typically very busy. How well you manage people and manage delivery means you get promoted and move up to the leadership position. And what I find is that a lot of leaders I work with are not letting go. They're still relying on that. So similar to the being busy, they're ultimately trying to they're trying to micromanage everything they do, even if they're not micromanaging their team. So, and this is an art, quite frankly. This is about empowering your team to get on with the work, staying in contact with them through the expectations, setting that clear vision, but ultimately giving them the freedom to deliver, because they end up coming up with some unexpected results and different ways of doing things. And when I've worked with leaders and I've coached them through this, and when I've delivered some projects and had my team deliver this for me as well, it's amazing when they do come back with that new way of doing things. It's amazing to see, but it is very much an art. So not letting go is more about, don't focus on the busy work. If you're doing busy work, and busy work means, booking meetings, replying to every single email, quickly, really think about your goals and what you need to achieve, as opposed to just being busy.
Yeah. So I agree with you on the art piece, but I would also add the caveat that the key tools to use here are the expectations and accountability.
Right.
Because in order to let go, what do we need? We need certainty that what is going to happen, what needs to happen, is actually going to happen. And that is where a lot of leaders, if they don't set expectations properly and drive accountability, have zero visibility into what is getting done. And then you get the hot and cold, and this is all like the perfect culmination, because it's all of the gotchas to avoid wrapped up in one, that this is the end result, is you can't let go. Right. So all the tools that we've talked about and ways to avoid these pitfalls 100% get, when applied, then allow you to let go. Right. So it's not like this is a whole separate new thing. It's just that this is the end result, and the goodness that comes out of doing all the other things really well. This is the byproduct.
Leadership is an eternal, that's what I love about leadership and helping leaders, is it's an eternal challenge in a good way. You're always learning something new. You're always having the opportunity to try something new. And ultimately, as you said at the beginning, develop yourselves. It is about a growth, because you don't stagnate as a leader, or you shouldn't anyway.
Yeah. If there's only two ways, you're either growing or you're dying.
Right.
And for us in the professional world, you better be growing. Otherwise, there's going to be missed opportunities that you're not going to be able to take advantage of. Simple as that. So my number 5 is not mastering time. And I think this ties in nicely to your number 5 as well, because if you are not able to do all the previous things that we talked about, right? If you fall into those pitfalls, you will not have time, quote unquote, right? What's the number one thing everybody says when you talk about their schedule and their time? I don't have time, right? That's what the common refrain always is. But the interesting thing is, we all have the exact same amount of time.
Right.
So whether you have time or you don't have time, you're actually right. Yes. And the funny thing is, it's completely up to you, right? There's a decision point that needs to be made. Now, there are tools and techniques and strategies, just like I teach in the B2B Leaders Academy, to help you master your time so that then you can free space to focus on the who, not the how. Right. So then you can do a better job of setting expectations, driving accountability to be the CEO of your career, to ultimately not be hot and cold, be consistent, and just let go. Right. But this is a byproduct of all those other things being done really well.
Right. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. I love it. It's neatly packaged up there in terms of busyness, because you're right. I love your quote again. If you have enough time or don't have enough time, you're right.
Yeah. Whether you think you have time or you don't, you're right.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. And
there's no wrong answer there.
Exactly. And there are situations where some people can't see that, and you do, as a leader, need to step in and guide them. But because at the end of the day, if someone doesn't have enough time, to your point, they're either not managing their own time well enough, they've got too much work on, or they need help. So that the work is too complicated, or they need help from other people. That's right. As a leader, sometimes you do need to step in and say, okay, here's some choices. What of those 3 things do we need to change here? Because some people do take on too much.
Yeah.
And there are in that leadership insight about when to step in and say, actually, you've got too much, we need to pass it off to someone else. And then managing that transition as well is an important insight to have.
And being able to take that step back and have that thought process and go through that conversation mentally, or even with a coach or somebody else, is incredibly important, and is not always easy. Right? I fully recognize that. Sometimes you have to create time in order to be able to save time. What I mean is, I just had a member of my B2B Leaders Academy go through, and in 1 month, I have a module that's called Master Your Time, where I have some tools on how to exert control and take control of your time and calendar. So in a matter of a few weeks, this individual saved an hour a day. This was a manager of a team, and he saved an hour a day. So every single day. So that was 5 hours a week immediately back into his, all of his work. And what he did with that time was then spend more time with his team in strategic ways,
nice.
Coaching them, providing them with development, guidance, structure, so that they could be more effective at their job. The only thing that changed from the month before he joined us till the first month he was in was the fact that he had new tools to apply. Like nothing in his environment changed. He still got the same amount of emails. His team still asked him the same types of questions. The only thing that changed was his approach to how he did that. So that's why I say that whether you have time or you don't, you're right. He did not have time coming into this. And then he made the choice to take control, implemented the tools, and all of a sudden is saving half a day a week that he can now focus on more strategic activities. Yeah,
that's an awesome story. I love hearing things like that as well, because it sounds so obvious, but it's just that nudge to make it happen. And it feels really uncomfortable when you start doing it as well. A lot of the work I do with when you're delivering a vision and starting to get real traction on ideas, to your point there, is you need to carve out time to do this, because anything you don't give time to doesn't appreciate. So even as simple as time blocking your calendar, it's amazing how quickly just putting a block of time to spend on strategic work suddenly adds up. And people go, well, I don't have time in my calendar. So, well, okay, let's try it. Let's book it in. Let's see what happens.
And all of a sudden, it's not that hard. Right. And this is one of those things, like all the tools we've been talking about today are not what I would consider, advanced anything. Like these are tools that anybody can put into practice.
Right.
And the funny thing is that sometimes I teach these tools and people tell me, yeah, Nils, I already know this. This is common sense.
Yes.
And I always reply with, the thing about common sense is it's not so common.
Yes.
And it is those things that people overlook, the fundamentals and the things that are common sense in search of some silver bullet or some, end all be all strategy to fix everything.
Yeah. The magic bullet.
It's about the fundamentals. Look at the most successful people in any industry. They nailed the things that everybody else skipped over exceptionally well to a world-class level. And all of a sudden they are performing at a completely different place than everybody else.
Yes.
Because they nailed the fundamentals. They didn't need anything new. They just needed to do what they know they needed to do really, really, really well.
Yes. Yeah. I love the analogy to that point. I love the analogy of golf swings. It takes a micro change in a golf swing to hit the green or not. Yeah. So it's just those little micro increments of your day to day, which ultimately have that biggest impact longer term.
That's right. Yeah. It's within reach. That's the other key message that I share. Like, as I mentioned, like I'm in this work and do this work with leaders to help make the world a better place because of the ripples of effective change, of the impact that you have as a leader. However, if you don't take advantage of that, you're leaving a huge opportunity to influence other people's lives and you're just leaving it on the table. And there's no need. And there are tools and programs like yours and mine that are available, thanks to the wonderful world of information age that we live in, that you can get access to world-class expertise in any topic, just like we are in our program with where we met, right? Yeah. With the swipe of a credit card and your name and email in a form, and that's it. All of a sudden, you're connected to a world-class leader, and you can exponentially accelerate your results.
Exactly. And a lot of people think it's about bragging or being boastful about the work. But the other way to position this is you're actually being selfish by not sharing that value with other people because you as a leader have valuable skills to share with others. So by not doing that, you're actually preventing other people developing and other good things in the world. So you're actually being selfish not doing this.
That is one of the craziest mind jumps that you do, right? And going to that, wait, how am I'm not being selfish. I thought I was not talking about myself and not bragging and whatnot, but wait a second, I'm selfish. Hold on. Yeah. And it's true. It's 100% true.
Yeah. So we've covered so many great points, and I just want to do a quick recap for our listeners. So what we'll do is maybe if we just I'll go through my 5 and go for your 5 again, and then this will give the listeners something really to latch onto. And like you say, very simple ideas and mistakes to fix, but taking the action is key.
Perfect.
So I started with my number 1, which was the I started with the how, not who, where you need to flip that around and do the who, not how. Then being on to not being, number 2 was not being clear on expectations and setting the right vision and goals. And then number 3 was blaming their team and making sure that you set the right expectations and give direction so you don't get in a position where you're blaming your team. Number 4 was running hot and cold and not being consistent and ultimately eroding trust with your teams. Mm-hmm. And then number 5 was not letting go, focusing on busy work and not getting into that strategic leadership work, which empowers your team, not micromanages your team.
Such a good list. All right. My number 1 was always having the answer. And the antidote to this, flip it around, don't have the answer. Number 2 was not enough accountability, which, as we talked about, accountability is the complement to expectations. If you do both of those things really well, the world gets a whole lot better. Number 3 was not being the CEO of your career. Ultimately, you're the chief. You're in charge of the strategic direction of your career. Nobody else is. Your company, your boss, your CEO, your family, nobody else is. It's your call. Take advantage of that power. Number 4 was communicating at the wrong level and assuming and suffering from the crisis of context, where you assume that other people outside of your immediate team have the same level of context as you. Right. And number 5 is not mastering your time, where whether you think you have time or you don't, you're right.
Yep. Awesome. Love it. Such a great list of 10 tips that we can share with our listeners. So yeah, with that, I think we'll be looking forward to doing this again. We'll certainly look to dive deeper on a couple of those topics there, Nils. But
it'll be fun.
Any last words before we finish up?
Just the fact that touching on the last things I said, which is there are programs, people, opportunities who have, like John and I, who have no other desire other than to help people grow and succeed in whatever they're doing, right? I focus it purely on the leadership side. John's on the leadership and the project management side, which is wonderful. So if you want to learn more about me, go to the b2bleadersacademy.com and check out the b2bleadershippodcast.com. Have some incredible interviews with leaders from B2B businesses where we pull back the curtains and find out how they got to where they are. And guess what? They talk about how they overcame a lot of these topics we've talked about today. Yes. So hope you enjoy that podcast as well. And John, thanks again so much for having me on today.
Yep, that was awesome. I've listened to a couple of your podcasts and they are awesome. So yep, recommend the listeners definitely check those out.
Thank you.
Great stuff, Nils. We'll look forward to chatting to you again and have a great rest of the day.
All right, sounds good, man. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks for listening to the Let's Talk About It podcast, brought to you by WeDeliverYourVision.com, the go-to place for delivering your vision and getting traction fast. Until the next episode, let's get it done.